Meghna is going to talk how we humans impact on the ecological diversity. So with this, we are going to start the session. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Kaushik. Thank you so much for that introduction. Let me just start sharing my screen, and please let me know if you can see.
Sure, ma'am. Yes, we are able to see, but you have to keep it in the full
Yeah,
screen.
I have to. No, not yet.
Not yet, ma'am.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
We are good to go. Yes, ma'am.
All right, great. Yeah. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this engagement and to have this opportunity to present some of my work to you guys. I really wish that we could have done this in person because I do enjoy very much interacting and talking to students and getting your questions one-on-one, but I guess we'll just have to make do with what we have today. So I'm Meghna Krishnadas. I'm a scientist at CCMB. Like Kaushik mentioned, I'm an ecologist, so I study life at a very different scale of organization from what you've been listening to so far today, which was looking at the role of looking at life at the scale of cells and proteins and those nitty-gritties, those functional basics that make up life on Earth. But what I study is life at the scale of species and large organisms and ecosystems and organization of life at that scale. And that's what we do as ecologists. And today I will be talking to you about what life on Earth means or is behaving in the age of humans. So we live on a remarkable place in this universe, right? Earth, which is, as far as we know, the only planet so far that has life on it. And it's not just that Earth has life, but Earth has a sheer astounding diversity of life. Whether we go from like the lush tropical rainforest to a dry savanna and a grassland system, or you climb up the hills or go along the latitude onto a temperate forest ecosystem full of pines and conifers and climb all the way to the top of a mountain where you find this high altitude systems that are all so different from one another. And each of these systems has its own specialty, has evolved with its own set of conditions and set of organisms there and processes that make these ecosystems function and behave a certain way. And this is not just on land, right? I mean, we see this diversity of life also happening in oceans, and oceans is in fact where life began. And as ecologists, what we do basically study this huge diversity of life and ecosystems and say, okay, we know that there is this diversity that exists, but why is it that some species are only found where they are? Why are some things tropical and some things, why do they like the snow? And what is it that makes these ecosystems different? So that's kind of our job as ecologists, right? We go out and study these beautiful places to figure out why or how do they come to be as they are. But while there is this sheer astounding variety of life around us, one thing that we know is that the creatures we see today have not been around forever, right? Things have changed on Earth. And in fact, since the time of the dawn of life, as it were, which was about 3.5 billion years ago, there have been many creatures that evolved and went extinct. And the Earth itself underwent some major geological changes. And there was changes in climate, there were changes in what happened to oxygen being put out in the atmosphere. And as a result, there were changes to the kind of ecosystems that were there on Earth and the organisms that inhabited that ecosystems. And there was an immense and long process of evolution that took place through these ages to structure life on Earth to the point where we see it today. Of course, there's a continuum, but they have also, despite all of the evolution, there have been periods of time in Earth's history when life went extinct. Like there were massive, large amounts of extinction, where in a majority of the species that inhabited the planet actually just couldn't make it through. And this happened because of some changes like change in the atmosphere, change in temperature, because of ice ages, like there being, everything just got snowed over. In fact, Earth once got completely snowed over and it was all ice everywhere. Or when there are large volcanoes that erupted and continuously spewed lava all over. And of course, we know the famous meteorite that sort of knocked out the dinosaurs. And during the course of geological history, paleoecological studies and paleological studies have shown us that there have been 5 major mass extinctions during which life on Earth went through these bottlenecks, these contractions. Now, the reason why I tell you this is because, as it happens, we are actually living through a 6th mass extinction. And this time, it's not because of geological forces like the climate, like a volcano, like a meteorite hitting us from outer space. It's because of us, humans, one species. Never before in the history of the planet has any one species taken up so much of the Earth's resources and made such a big difference to the way the Earth works in terms of changing even geological processes. So the question is, if we are living in such a changing planet, then how are the living organisms that are sharing this planet with us responding to this, or how are they being affected by this change, this, having had to live through the 6th mass extinction? And the question is, why is this mass extinction happening? And I'm sure that some of you already know about this, or you've been thinking about this, but a lot of the actions that we humans do are leading to the extinction crisis that we are living in today. For example, overhunting and overfishing. Now, humans we are omnivores, right? We eat meat and we eat vegetables, and we have been hunter-gatherers in our past, and we have hunted and fished for a long time. But the scale at which we do it today and the reasons for which we do it today are very different. So, we seem to prefer today an ornament made with a rhino horn to the rhino itself, or a pretty little thing on a mantelpiece to the magnificent elephant whose ivory is used to make this little piece, or fur coats to the animals that actually made the fur, and so on and so forth. So in some sense, our consumerism, our desire to use resources for things other than just our need, is leading or fueling part of this mass extinction crisis that we see. But that's not all, right? Like, even if we were not to do all of those things, the sheer number of us humans on this earth today mean that we require resources. And when we need, or when we use resources for food, fuel, timber, energy, for all of these things, we appropriate these resources from the earth that we live on. And therefore, we appropriate it from all of the other living organisms or the habitats that hold these resources. So for example, when we are mining, it destroys large swaths of forest, and this kind of forest loss has many negative consequences for the animals and plants that live in this area. Same thing when we go dam an area, or when we clear forests and ecosystems for agriculture, when we do logging. All of these have negative impacts if done, or when done at the scale at which we are doing it today. Now, it's not that we can't do without these things. I guess the question is, how do we do them right so that we also create space or allow for other organisms, this, the sheer astounding diversity of life that we spoke about, for them to cohabit the planet along with us into the future? Or are we just going to do it, lead to this mass extinction inexorably? And to add to all of this, the climate, which has never before changed because of any one species, is changing because of us, because of what we are doing. The massive amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that we are putting in, combined with the fact that many of the natural ecosystems that store and keep this carbon down are getting destroyed, leading to a change in climate where things are getting warmer. And it's not just that the planet is getting warmer, it's the climate is getting more unpredictable, which means there are going to be more extreme weather events, and there are going to be changes to the way ecosystems look and the way they are structured. The processes I was talking about that makes these ecosystems what they are, that makes the Arctic, and a tropical rainforest are going to change in the near future, are already changing. And so the earth and all of its living organisms, all of its systems, all the ecological processes are now under a huge stress that is caused by a multitude of factors which are being generated by human impacts. So that is kind of what I do, right? Like I try to understand what is going to be the impact of humans on these different ecosystems, because we know that it's happening now. So the big question is, what happens to ecosystems, plants and animals on this fast changing earth when you have all of these different drivers that are sort of, coming together to change the ecosystems as we have always known them. So for example, on this map of India, you see that India, we think of, India as in terms of states or cities or what, but India is actually extremely heterogeneous in terms of its diversity of ecosystems as well. From the west coast of peninsular India, where there are lush rainforests, as there are on northeastern mountains near the border with China. You go on to like dry grasslands. A lot of peninsular India is dry deciduous forests and grasslands, and you go all the way to the Himalayas, where it's snowy, icy mountain caps, and of course we all know the desert as well. And each of these systems has its own set of organisms that have evolved to live in these areas. So the question is now, if the weather is getting drier and the monsoon is changing and the rainforest may shift into becoming a more dry forest, what kind of species are going to be able to make it? What kind of species will survive? What will win and what will lose? What will do well? What will get hit? And those are some of the kinds of questions that we ask in the kind of work we do. For example, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but recently or over the past few years, there have been these coral bleaching events because of warming in the ocean seas and acidification of the ocean. And the corals off the island of Lakshadweep, which were beautiful corals, got completely bleached. And there's a team of researchers out there that is studying, okay, why has this happened? What does this mean? Is it really damaging? Are there some species that do really well? Will some species come back? Is there any amount of resilience? What species are most sensitive? And to some extent, we also need to understand this information in order to be able to restore or manage some of these systems, or let's say we want to improve degraded systems, impose some protection measures. So for all of that, the science of how these systems work and how they are responding to these different stressors that are there around in the world today, that's what gives us the information to make those decisions for the future. And that's where ecology comes in, right? Ecology is the science of why species live where they live and how do they live with each other. So for example, if you go to the Antarctic, why does the Antarctic ecosystem look so different from a rainforest ecosystem in the tropics? Why does a polar bear live only in the Antarctic or the cold regions? Or why is it that a jaguar can only be there in the Amazonian rainforest? So when we know why, the answer to why some of these species are there because they're here, which may be because of long historical evolutionary processes, or they may be because of more recent, more small scale processes, such as the kind of food that they need, the kind of shelter they need, the kind of environment they want to live in, the climate that they are suitable to. All of the answering these questions will give us a handle on how these species might be affected if these conditions in which they live are now changing. And by extension, if we want to protect these species, what kind of measures should we put in place such that the requirements of these species are also met? And that's what we try to do. We try to fit together pieces of the puzzle. As an ecologist, we kind of, go out into the world and we see, oh, this is how the system might be working. These are the major processes that seem to drive the system. Then we design studies which allow us, we have to design them really carefully, right? Because our systems are complex. It's not like working in a lab. We have to think of all of these things, all of the processes that might confound or that might confuse us or give us wrong results. And we have to make sure that we account for those things. But we go out and design our studies out in nature to be able to understand how these systems work. So like I said, the wild is our lab. That's where we go out and collect our data. So once we have come up with a question, once we have come up with a process that we are interested to look at, then we go out into the field and we collect the data that will answer that question or give us an insight into that process that is going on. So here, for example, you see that there are these researchers who are diving into the deep sea in order to look at how, well, these are shallow seas actually, to look at how corals recover after a bleaching event, or what happens to corals when there's influx of polluted water. People also study how plants do in rainforest, for example, or in dry forest. They tag little seedlings and they monitor them and come back after years and years and years and see which species are growing well, which species seem to be dying out, and why is that happening? Is it because of the soil? Is it because of light? Is it because of the fungi and insects and the other organisms that might be interacting with those seeds and seedlings? And of course, people do similar things, go walk transects to sample birds, butterflies, mammals, and all of this data we kind of put together in sophisticated models, or we use a lot of statistics to answer some of our questions, and we put them together to figure out, oh, this is how the ecosystem works, or this is how the species is responding. So on your left, for example, is is a graph that was from a study where we looked at how do plant species respond when there is a difference in the water available in the climate, like a dry climate versus a wet climate. And without going into the details, I'll just tell you that what this tells us is that species do different things. Some species seem to do very well when there is high drought or when there's low water, and other species seem to do well only when there is a lot of water in the system, which means that with climate change, if we have low rainfall, then the species that need a lot of water to do well or thrive in those areas are probably going to get knocked out if there's a change in the climate. On the right is an example of a graph where we looked at how bird communities or groups of birds change when there is a change in land use, which is when a forest becomes slightly degraded, then it gets lopped because of timber, or when it gets converted to agriculture. And what those circles are telling us is that the birds that are there in these different land uses are actually very different. And that's kind of where we go with the science, saying that, oh, so the lopped forest seems to be very different from the natural forest. So we need to do something to restore it back to a place where the bird community can look similar to what it did in a natural forest. And another example is from the kind of work that I do, for instance, where I want to see how when you break up once a large piece of forest into smaller and smaller parcels, what does that do to the species, the tree species mainly, that are there or that used to be there in this forest? And one of the major things that happen is that the creation, or when you create a forest edge, it's a very warm, dry condition, which is a very stressful condition. And while some species seem to do very well at the edge, that's what our research and research from around the globe is showing, there are other species that only do well when they are in the cool, humid interiors. So for some of my work, I'm trying to see if there is a change in the climate, if the climate is going to get warmer and drier, or the rainy season gets shorter, the dry season gets longer, how are we going to see tree species respond to these changes when they're at the forest edge and at the forest interior? And what I do is I go out and set up experiments. I take seedlings that have grown in a greenhouse, I put them in the forest, I put the same seedlings at the edge and the interior, and then I cover them with a sheet to prevent any rain from coming in for one half of the seedlings. The other half, I just monitor them. And then I want to see after about 2 years, which of these seedlings live, which die, and can we get a handle on which ones are doing well at the edges and which ones are not. Because if something is not doing well at the edges, then we know that we need to preserve enough forest, or we need to help restore it such that it can persist in a changing climate in these kind of systems. Now, you might also think that, oh, all of this is just about other species. We don't, how does it matter? Most of science we think should be for the well-being of humans and for the benefit of humans. Well, maybe so. But what we don't understand, or a picture that we often miss, is that to have well-functioning, healthy ecosystems is also important for humans. We may not realize it every day in our lives because many of us living in cities especially are fairly disconnected from the kind of services we get. But the rivers that bring water to your homes, or the kind of weather, the climate cycling that is happening, the nutrients that are there in the soil, all of these services we get from nature, and we need healthy functioning ecosystems for these services to be maintained. And many of them are really important, for example, in agricultural areas where nutrient cycling is a really, really important critical part of healthy agricultural systems. And some studies seem to show that if you have forests or natural ecosystems nearby, then you have a healthy group of pollinators, the ones like bees and birds that come and help pollinate the crops. You get better crops, you get insect control, because birds eat up the damaged insects that tend to damage crops. And of course, you get healthy soils and you get a good supply of water for your crops. And yet, despite this knowledge, we kind of think that studying an ecosystem is just for its own sake. And the other thing, we are living in the times of a pandemic that happened because there was a spillover of a virus from one organism to humans. And the more we destroy ecosystems, the more we disturb them or come into more and more unhealthy contact with these ecosystems, the more likely it is that these disturbed ecosystems will spill over or spew diseases onto humans. And why this happens is a fascinating area of ecological study. It's called disease ecology. But one of the things that we think happens is that when you fragment or break up a forest, many of the animals that, or the original complement, the suite of animals that used to be there, don't live there anymore, right? And they're replaced by an increase in rodents or some animals that live more closely and interact more closely with humans. And that leads to an increase in disease transmission. And this is something that is being examined very carefully around the world now. And when you think of it, like all these changes that we are doing eventually is affecting us too, right? And understanding the implications of these changes in some sense is also understanding what this might mean in the future for us. The systems as we know it, the climate as we know it, is not going to be the same anymore. The agriculture as we know it cannot be the same anymore. And an ecological perspective actually helps us also figure out what the future might hold for us, and therefore prepare for it, hopefully, or at least slow down the catastrophe that we seem to be going towards. But at the end of it, I would say that as an ecologist, the reason why I love to study or do ecology is just because I'm in love with it. Because I'm fascinated by the fact that a square meter of the forest can be a universe unto itself. And there can be just so many mysteries that are there in what seems like a quiet stand of trees, but there's just so much life. It's teeming with life. There's just so much going on there. And I think that fascination is what brings me back, the ability or the opportunity to understand some of nature's cryptic workings, to go back and see, this is how it happens. Wow. That fascination is really what makes me be an ecologist and brings me back again and again to the forest or the fields, wherever I am. But I would just like to leave us with this final perspective where I started, which is like, yes, there is a universe in a square meter of forest, but we should never forget the fact that we are part of a larger system of life on planet Earth. And ecology is in some way a very philosophical science, because it shows us our place in this world, and it makes us think of what it means to be part of such a larger system of life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meghna. I would like to mention that all of your slides were very engaging, colorful, and fascinating. And we have a question from YouTube. Mm-hmm. So I wonder how useful it is to look at past local abrupt changes in order to see what type of plants succeed, etc., at rapid pace. I'm thinking of the Dust Bowl in the US.
Okay. No, that's a great question, actually. And incidentally, the Dust Bowl has been used to look at some of these ecological questions. Well, these are what we call natural experiments, like the Dust Bowl that happens, or a huge, let's say, hurricanes that sort of blow down a large forest and we see how it recovers, or let's say a huge wildfire that happens and we see what ensues in the following weeks or months. And yes, these systems or these incidents can be used to understand some ecological processes, but not all, right? There are also many other questions that require us to design the study to answer that particular question, or to design an experiment, whether short-term or long-term, to really get at that particular process of interest. So it's a combination of things.
So the other question is, for the school students, what is Dust Bowl? It will be good if you can explain it in the very simpler way.
Okay, so let's see if I can do this. So basically, if you're what happened with the Dust Bowl was that I think if I recall correctly, it was because of, it was a desertification process that happened because of massive deforestation or change in the natural habitat, which led to a huge scarcity of water and the climate changing in that particular place such that there was no rain coming in at all. And so what happened was that the earth became barren, which means it became very, it was dry and barren, and there were no trees that could, or plants that could take root, and the earth or the dust just started flying around. And so that entire area of Kansas just became a huge bowl of dust, literally, hence the name.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meghna. So some of the phrases that you have mentioned in your talk was very, very fascinating. I would like to mention what will win and what will lose. So these are some important phrases that I would like to mention here. And
okay.
Yeah, these are the things which we need to keep in mind. Yes, as you told, we are always part of a very big universe, and we should not exploit it more. Yes. Thank you so much, Meghna.
Thank you. Thanks, Kaushik.
Yeah. So with the session by Dr. Meghna, we came to the end of Vigyan Yatra 2020. I would like to remind you all about 6th Indian International Science Festival 2020, which is going to be conducted in virtual mode this year from 22 to 25 December 2020. On behalf of CSIR, CCMB, and IISF 2020, I would like to thank you all for attending this Vigyan Yatra 2020. Have a happy evening. Thank you all again.